Welcome back to the Stolen Stitch Stitchery Files. This is your cozy crochet along mystery series where storytelling and crafting come together. Grab your yarn, your hook, and settle in as we continue to unravel the thrilling tale of Willow Haven Stitchery and create another beautiful square for our project. Last time in Willow Haven Stitchery, Margaret and her team uncovered a hidden box inside the old loom. Inside were cryptic documents, a shimmering swatch of fabric, and the name Eleanor Hathaway, a key figure from the Stitchery's past. Their search for answers took a dramatic turn when a stranger arrived, leaving behind a folder full of secrets and a warning. With the mystery deepening, the question remains: what legacy did Eleanor leave behind, and who doesn't want it uncovered? Let's pick up where we left off and follow the threads further. Margaret flipped through the journal she had found earlier, its worn pages crinkling softly with each turn. The morning light filtered through the shop's curtains, casting long shadows across the counter. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, sharp and deliberate. Mrs. Patel glanced up from her yarn, her expression curious. Margaret crossed the room, her footsteps echoing softly, and opened the door to reveal a small package left on the stoop. She brought it inside and set it down on the table. The faint sound of paper tearing followed as she unwrapped the package. Inside was an old, faded crochet swatch tucked next to a handwritten note. Before diving deeper into today's mystery, let's begin crocheting our next square with the moss stitch. Since this block needs to stay consistent, we'll make a small adjustment to fit the stitch pattern. Foundation chain. Start by chaining 34 stitches to accommodate the moss stitch's need for even numbers. First row, skip the first 3 chains. These act as the turning chain, and make your first single crochet in the 4th chain from the hook. Then chain 1, skip the next chain, and single crochet into the following chain. Repeat this pattern across the row. Chain 1, skip 1, single crochet into the next. By the end of the row, you'll have 25 stitches, perfectly aligned with our block's requirements. Margaret's voice filtered through the shop, filling the quiet as she focused on the swatch from the package. "It's almost like someone left this on purpose," she murmured. Margaret unfolded the note carefully, her brow furrowing as she read aloud. "To understand Eleanor's legacy, you must look beyond the obvious. The stitches speak for themselves if you know where to look." Mrs. Hendricks appeared from the back room, drying her hands on a towel. She raised an eyebrow at the swatch. "Well, isn't that cryptic?" Margaret laid the swatch flat on the table, examining it closely. "Look at these edges. They're uneven, almost deliberate. Someone stitched this with a purpose." The faint sound of a sneeze interrupted the group's quiet contemplation, pulling their attention to Mr. Green, who sheepishly shrugged in the corner. "How's everyone doing with the foundation row?" The moss stitch is all about building a rhythm. Single crochet, chain, skip, repeat. Take your time to adjust the tension and find the flow. It's a wonderfully textured stitch that will unfold beautifully as we continue. Row 2 and beyond. Turn your work and chain 2. Start your next row by single crocheting into the chain, 1 space from the previous row, then chain 1, skip the next single crochet, and single crochet into the next chain, 1 space. Repeat across the row, keeping your tension even and relaxed. Margaret traced her fingers over the uneven stitches of the swatch. "This wasn't made for decoration," she said softly. "It's a clue, a deliberate one. Eleanor left us something to unravel here." Her words lingered as the group exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the mystery pressing heavily on the shop's warm atmosphere. Margaret held the swatch in her hands, turning it over and tracing the uneven stitches. "These edges aren't just sloppy. They were stitched deliberately," she said. The group gathered around her, eyes narrowing as they tried to make sense of the cryptic piece. The quiet atmosphere of the shop was disrupted by the faint chime of a clock marking the hour. Mrs. Patel leaned in closer, her voice soft but determined. "It's almost like they wanted us to look at the back." Margaret nodded, flipping the swatch again. "But why use silver green thread for this part and not something else?" The sound of a chair scraping against the floor broke the silence as Mrs. Talbot adjusted her seat, her curiosity evident. Margaret glanced up briefly from the swatch. "It's a bit like crochet, deliberate steps with hidden meaning," she said, her voice thoughtful. Mrs. Hendricks, clutching her notebook, pointed at one corner of the swatch. "It's uneven here, but look closer. It's almost forming something. A pattern?" Margaret squinted at the uneven section. "You're onto something," she murmured, examining it further. "These gaps, they're too precise to be a mistake. Look here." As she ran her fingers over the swatch, the whisper of pages turning from the notebook added a soft background sound. "What do we think this is leading to?" Mr. Green asked, sounding more intrigued than skeptical for once. Margaret set the swatch down carefully. "I think it's leading us to the next clue, or the next piece of the puzzle, but it's buried within the stitching itself." "How's everyone doing with the moss stitch so far?" "By now, you should have 3 textured rows starting to form that iconic spaced pattern. Keep an eye on your tension and ensure your chain spaces stay consistent. They'll give your square that beautiful, airy texture. If you're feeling confident, turn your work and start your next row. It's just a rinse and repeat of the steps we've been practicing, but take it slow if you need to." Margaret pressed her lips into a thin line, her eyes narrowing as she carefully studied the cryptic stitching. "This swatch isn't just a clue, it's a breadcrumb, deliberately placed for us to follow." The weight of her words filled the shop, leaving an unsettling air of curiosity and determination. The faint creak of the shop door as the wind nudged it closed added to the atmosphere, hinting that things were about to take a darker turn. The swatch lay flat on the table, its uneven stitches drawing all eyes to the cryptic pattern. Margaret leaned in, tracing her fingers over the edges. "There's something we're not seeing here," she murmured. The room was unusually quiet, broken only by the faint tap of Margaret's nails against the table as she contemplated the swatch. Mrs. Patel was the first to speak. "It's not just random. These gaps, they're placed with precision. If we can figure out the reasoning, we might understand the message." Margaret nodded, her brow furrowing. "But we'll need more information to piece this together." The sound of a binder being slid off a shelf added to the tension as Mrs. Patel went straight for the archive cabinet. "Eleanor's work always had a story behind it," she said. "There must be something in these drafts that can guide us. Let's take a break from the puzzle and keep working on our moss stitch square. For your next row and beyond, the pattern stays the same. Turn your work and chain 2. This will act as your turning chain and the setup for the new row. Single crochet into the first chain 1 space from the previous row, then chain 1 and skip the next single crochet. Continue this pattern across the row. It's all about maintaining the rhythm and tension to create that beautiful, airy texture. Margaret glanced up from the table, her expression focused. "It's just like the moss stitch," she said softly. "Each detail matters." Mrs. Patel set a binder on the table with a muted thud, flipping quickly through its pages. "Here," she said, pointing to a sketch. "This motif is almost identical to what's on the swatch, but it's incomplete." Margaret studied the design, her gaze sharp. "Eleanor must have left this as a breadcrumb," she murmured. "But why leave it unfinished?" The sound of someone's chair scraping back slightly drew everyone's attention to Mr. Green, who had been unusually quiet. "Maybe it wasn't finished for a reason," he said, "like it's part of a larger whole." Margaret looked thoughtful. That would explain the gaps. Maybe this swatch is just one piece of a bigger pattern. "How's your moss stitch square coming along? By now you should have a few rows completed and the texture should be taking shape. If you're finding your tension too tight or too loose, adjust as you go. It's all about finding the flow that works for you. And remember, just like this mystery, every stitch adds to the bigger picture. Let's keep building, row by row." Margaret shut the binder with a decisive snap. "This swatch isn't just a clue. It's a piece of the puzzle Eleanor was trying to preserve." The faint creak of the shop door as the wind pushed against it made everyone glance up. Margaret's eyes lingered on the door before she looked back at the swatch, her expression unreadable. "Whatever she was protecting, someone doesn't want it found," she said quietly. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Margaret stood by the counter, her gaze fixed on the swatch still spread across the table. "This isn't just a clue, it's a warning," she murmured, almost to herself. The faint tinkle of the wind chime at the shop's entrance pulled everyone's attention. A man stepped inside, his dark coat dusted with early spring rain. He carried an envelope in his hand, his expression unreadable. "Margaret Jensen?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the room's tension. Margaret folded her arms, her sharp eyes studying the stranger. "That depends," she said cautiously. The man placed the envelope on the counter, his gloved hand lingering on it for a moment. "I was told to give this to you," he said before turning and walking out. The soft jingle of the door closing followed, as the wind swept in briefly, carrying the scent of rain. Margaret lifted the envelope and turned it over in her hands. "No return address," she said, frowning, "and no markings." Margaret opened the envelope carefully, the sound of paper crinkling softly breaking the heavy silence. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the handwritten lines. Mrs. Patel, unable to contain her curiosity, stepped closer. "What does it say?" Margaret read aloud. "The truth is in the stitches, but the danger lies between the lines. Trust no one." The words sent a shiver down my spine, and the air in the shop felt colder. The faint tap of raindrops against the window added to the growing tension. "What danger?" Mrs. Talbot whispered, her voice trembling. Margaret set the note down, her expression unreadable. "Whoever left this knows something we don't. And they're warning us. We need to figure this out before it's too late. How's your square coming along? By now, you should have a few rows completed, and the moss stitch texture should be fully visible. If you're finding your rhythm, Keep going at your own pace. And don't worry, every stitch brings us closer to completing our project and unraveling this mystery. Margaret folded the note and slipped it back into the envelope. Her gaze swept over the group. We've got more questions than answers, but one thing is clear. We're not the only ones trying to solve this. The shop fell quiet again, the weight of her words settling over us. The faint groan of the old floorboards as someone shifted broke the silence, reminding us just how little we truly knew. The shop had grown quieter as the afternoon wore on. Margaret stood by the swatch, her sharp gaze fixed on its uneven stitches. Whatever Eleanor was trying to tell us, it starts here, she said firmly. Mrs. Patel placed her notebook on the counter, the faint scratch of her pencil breaking the silence as she jotted down her thoughts. It's incomplete, she said, gesturing at the swatch. A deliberate gap in the stitches, and it's like she wanted to force us to look for what's missing. Margaret nodded, and she knew someone would try to stop us from finding it. The group split up, each taking a section of the shop to scour for more clues. The faint creak of a cabinet door opening echoed as Mrs. Talbot rummaged through the storage shelves. If Eleanor left anything else behind, it would be here, she muttered, her voice half lost among the sound of boxes being shifted. Margaret flipped through the journal from earlier, her brow furrowed in concentration. Eleanor always left breadcrumbs, she said aloud, mostly to herself. Her work was methodical, yet she had a way of hiding things in plain sight. The room grew heavy with anticipation, interrupted only by the distant clang of a teacup, as Mr. Green accidentally nudged the tray on the side table. "Careful," Mrs. Hendricks said sharply, appearing from the back room with a stack of papers in her hands. She spread them across the table, her eyes scanning each page for anything out of the ordinary. It was Margaret who found it, an old envelope tucked between the pages of Eleanor's journal. The sound of paper tearing broke the tense silence as she carefully opened it. Inside was a single piece of folded parchment, its edges frayed with age. "What is it?" Mrs. Patel asked, her eyes wide. Margaret unfolded the paper slowly, revealing a diagram stitched into the surface, threads of ink meticulously arranged to mimic crochet stitches. "It's a design," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but not like anything we've seen before." The faint whistle of the wind outside the shop sent a shiver down my spine as I leaned in for a closer look. The stitches formed a geometric pattern with markings that resembled the ones on the swatch. Mrs. Talbot gasped softly. "It's part of the missing pattern," she said, her voice trembling, "but it's incomplete." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "Eleanor never finished it," she said, "or maybe she didn't want to. Either way, this is more than just a design. It's a message." The weight of Margaret's words hung over us as we stared at the parchment. The sense of urgency was palpable, like the air had grown heavier in the small shop. "We need to figure out what this means. And fast," Margaret said, slipping the parchment into a protective sleeve. "If someone was willing to take the original pattern, they'll come back for this too." The sound of footsteps pacing outside the shop made us all freeze for a moment, our eyes darting to the window. Margaret's gaze darkened. "We're not just solving a mystery anymore," she said quietly. "We're protecting Eleanor's legacy." Margaret carefully unfolded the parchment found in the envelope, the soft crinkle of the aged paper breaking the silence. The intricate design of stitches and lines stared back at us, cryptic yet deliberate. This is more than just a pattern," Margaret said, her voice steady but laced with unease. It's a map, of sorts. A map to what? Mrs. Talbot asked, her voice trembling. Margaret shook her head, her finger tracing the lines. I'm not sure yet, but Eleanor meant for us to find this. It's part of what she left behind. The faint rustle of fabric being adjusted pulled our focus momentarily as Mrs. Patel shifted in her chair. Just as Margaret leaned closer to examine the parchment, a faint knock at the window startled us all. The shop fell deathly quiet, everyone glancing toward the darkened glass. What was that? Mr. Green whispered, his usual bravado now missing. Margaret stood, her movements deliberate, and crossed the room. She peered out into the night, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the street lamp outside. After a moment, she turned back to us. Nothing, she said, her expression unreadable. Just the wind. But the tension in her voice suggested otherwise. Margaret returned to the table, her gaze heavy with thought. This parchment, the swatch, the missing pattern, it's all connected, she said, her voice resolute. Mrs. Patel gestured toward the parchment. And the warning, the danger lies between the lines. Could it mean something hidden in this map? Before Margaret could answer, the faint hum of the shop's old heater kicked in, its familiar drone momentarily breaking the eerie quiet. This isn't just about Eleanor's work, Margaret said finally. It's about the lengths someone is willing to go to protect or expose whatever she was hiding. Margaret folded the parchment and slipped it into a protective sleeve. We have to figure this out, and quickly, she said firmly, before someone else does. As the group exchanged uneasy glances, the soft creak of a floorboard behind us sent a chill down my spine. Margaret turned sharply, her eyes scanning the shadows, but there was nothing there. Lock up the shop tonight, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. We can't take any chances. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed through the room, the weight of the mystery settling over us like a storm cloud. The shop was silent once more, but the feeling of being watched lingered long after we had all gone our separate ways. As the shop fell silent once more, the weight of everything that had unfolded settled over us. Margaret placed the parchment carefully back into the binder, her movements steady but deliberate, as if protecting something fragile. Eleanor's legacy is more than a pattern, she said softly, her words lingering in the air like the faint tick of the clock in the corner. It's a puzzle, and someone doesn't want us to solve it. I glanced down at my moss-stitched square, the texture growing row by row. Each loop and space seemed to mirror the mystery, an unfinished story waiting to be stitched together. Margaret turned to us, her gaze resolute. Tomorrow we dig deeper. We're running out of time and answers. The faint whistle of the wind outside made the shop feel colder, reminding us that while the stitchery was a safe haven, the world beyond its doors carried unknown dangers. As I packed up my supplies, I couldn't help but wonder what secrets were hidden between the stitches, and how far would someone go to keep them buried? As we finish our moss-stitched square, the story grows deeper, and the stakes higher. Each stitch we make brings us closer to uncovering the truth, but also reminds us that every mystery comes with its own risks. Next time, we'll continue to unravel Eleanor's legacy and dive into another technique as we stitch our way forward. Keep your hook sharp and your tension steady. There's much more to come. Until next time, happy crocheting!